Hi guys.
Hello.
All good. Sorry, just getting things together. All well with you?
Yeah.
Elections
The
being
time
announced
is
tomorrow.
tomorrow, is that right?
Oh,
Yes.
is it?
Does someone else want to open for a change?
I'll be like Ruchir Punjabi. Yeah, or
All
Ruchir
right.
really. Hello and welcome everyone. We are here for the 8th episode of the India Dialogue, and we are, as Ruchir would say, super excited that you're willing to give us a listen. My name is Manu, before I introduce myself, let me introduce Mitali Mukherjee, who is the Director of Journalism at the Reuters Institute in Oxford, and who's extremely well known for her work in Indian media, starting from CNBC to The Wire. And Ruchir is CEO of Distributed Energy and chair at the School of Policy and Governance, and he's a tech guy and not a tech bro. I, Manuraj Shanmugasundaram, I'm not only a successful advocate according to Ruchir, but I have my own law practice and I'm a media spokesperson for the Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam. We are here and we are doing this podcast because we have lots of time on our hands, but actually because we do seriously care about India, its political discourse, and the kind of policy issues which unfortunately never make it into mainstream media space, or at least as much as we would like them to. More than anything else, we are all friends, we know each other, we respect each other, and we want to discuss important issues in India, sensitive or not, and friendly disagreements or not, without having to shout at each other or live in slogans. So, for now, this is an experiment we want to run in the lead up to the 2024 general elections, which are announced already, and we're excited to sort of discuss a little bit more about them in the weeks to come. Maybe we'll continue after, maybe we won't. But for now, we want to give this a shot and help unpack key issues in what is said to be an exciting election season. So today, to begin, we have two issues that we want to take you through. First is the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019, and second is the issue around electoral bonds. So first, Citizenship Amendment Act. Ruchir, do you want to take us through?
I
What is
will.
this?
And Manu, I think you should open a lot more. It's funnier than when I do it. I really wanted to moderate this issue because I have a lot of questions. It's relative. It feels confusing. Maybe there is not as much to the issue as I think there may be. But effectively, it provides a fast track to Indian citizenship for non-Muslim. Well, it's very specific on Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi, or Christian communities from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan who've arrived before December 31st, 2014. It reduces the residency requirement to less than 5 years or not less than 5 years. Manu, why don't you tell us a little bit more? Of course, everybody's heard this headline of dog whistling, but what is going on here? Why is this an important topic to discuss?
So let's look at the timeline, Ruchi, to begin with. It is the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, right? So the Citizenship Act itself was legislated in 1965. So it's gone through a number of amendments since then. But the Citizenship Amendment Act 2019 is particularly interesting, and it's strange that we're discussing this in 2024, literally weeks before the election. What does that tell us? Firstly, a legislation was duly enacted by Parliament in 2019, late 2019, if I recall correctly, and they waited 4.5 years to actually notify the rules. What were they waiting for? This is unheard of. Never according to me, to my little knowledge, never in Indian political parliamentary history have rules been notified 4.5 years. So why was this law enacted in November, December 2019 when it was? So clearly this is what I would call textbook politicization of a policy issue. Now, what is the policy issue? As you've very neatly described, this is a citizenship pathway for people who are essentially non-Muslims. They can be Hindus, Christians, Jains, Sikhs, or Buddhists, and they must come from what are Muslim majority countries, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, or Pakistan, and they must have come into India before a certain date, and they must claim and perhaps establish religious persecution in these countries, right? To sum up, this is what I would call an extension of a sort of a promised Hindu land, or a promised Hindu Rashtra. The idea for this is largely drawn from the concept of Akhand Bharat, which the RSS, and many RSS affiliated organizations draw from. And for them, they still many of the RSS leaders and today's BJP leaders still hold the Indian nationalist independence freedom fighter leaders, mainly from the Indian National Congress, responsible for giving up jurisdictions, giving up territories like Pakistan and Bangladesh to the Muslim League, as it was then, led by Jinnah and others. And they see that, this was a huge mistake, huge sort of setback to this, Hindu nation that we were building and we would have been and otherwise. Interestingly, this week, when the Home Minister spoke about it to defend and justify the Amendment Act, he says, he points out data, very, very tenuous at best. He says that the proportion of Hindus in Pakistan has come down over the last 50 years. He quotes some data, say, from 23% to 10%. Likewise, he says the number of Sikhs living in Afghanistan has also come down in the last 50 years. And likewise, he quotes a number for Bangladesh. But, this is so problematic and so poorly sort of done, because there is no connection between a number or a proportion of an ethnic community coming down and religious persecution, because religious persecution is not the only reason why numbers must come down. As you know, it could very well be people had the population proportion of population rate has come down. It could very well be that people from a particular ethnic group have gone to other countries, Western countries typically emigrated because, these are developing countries and so on. But anyway, the idea that he says, that Home Minister Amit Shah says, that India has a moral and constitutional obligation to provide refuge. Now, that's the problem. We have a moral obligation to provide refuge, yes, to asylum seekers, but not only on the basis of religion. In fact, interestingly, I will tell you the entire sort of narrative that the BJP and its supporters are trying to set through this particular Amendment Act, Ruchir. They're trying to make it seem like, no, it is just an extension of this refugee pathway to citizenship, which it is not. And I'll tell you why. Because India, firstly, what you need to keep in mind is India does not have a refugee policy. India does not have a refugee law. India is not a signatory to the Refugee Convention or the United Nations Refugee Protocol. We are one of the few countries where actually none of our laws actually use the word refugee. In fact, Citizenship Act itself does not use the word refugee or asylum seeker. So how are they even claiming this to be a refugee policy or a law is unfathomable. I'll tell you, citizenship in India can only happen through 3 or 4 channels. 1, by birth. 2, by registration. 3, by marriage. 4, naturalization. There's about 3 or 4 of these ways you can do. So this particular pathway that they've created is to make sure that those who come in without a visa, who are essentially refugees in a sense, they're usually under the Citizenship Act hit with the tag of illegal migrant. So who is an illegal migrant? An illegal migrant is a person who comes into India without a visa or comes in with a visa and overstays. Okay, so then these people are typically brought under the control of the state government and the union government, and they're kept in camps. So now what they're trying to do is say that if you are a Hindu from a Muslim majority country, or if you're a Christian from a Muslim majority country, then we will take that illegal migrant tag away. It is actually undoing what I think is a problem in our Citizenship Act. It is not a positive legislation which makes India more refugee friendly in that sense. So I want to first make it very clear, India is not a refugee friendly country at all. So beyond that, why should this only be in terms of religion? That is the huge problem, which I don't think we have a clear explanation. Our constitution prohibits us discriminating on the basis of religion. So how can a law, an act brought in by parliament, say that we will only allow non-Muslims, right? So why what about the question that has been asked repeatedly and there is no answer forthcoming from the government is, what about Muslims who are persecuted in any of these countries? And there's n number of examples, Rohingyas to others. What about them? There is no clear answer. So again, like I said, the problematic part is at the very least that this is a law which was brought in 2019, and suddenly on the eve of the election you now are notifying the law and the rules and trying to say we will implement it, when clearly you had no intention of doing that for 4.5 years. It is problematic because I find it fundamentally discriminatory against Muslims. You cannot say that only people from these religious backgrounds will be allowed into the country and only they will be treated. And largely also refugees or asylum seekers come from different issues. They come from political persecution, ethnic persecution, ethno-linguistic persecution. Case and example is Sri Lanka and the Tamils there. So that is an ethno-linguistic persecution. Now, one of the big issues that we have raised in Tamil Nadu and the DMK is that what about the Sri Lankan Tamils? There's almost 100,000 of them in camps over the last 30-40 years in Tamil Nadu. Why aren't they being included? And there is no answer why they are not being included. And a lot of them also happen to be Hindus, right? Not all of them, but a lot of them happen to be Hindus. Still, it's not clear why they are being discriminated only because Sri Lanka is not a Muslim majority country. That seems off. So therefore, let me just close by saying this is not a refugee law. This is not a positive action, positive discrimination by any sense. This is a sort of a, as you said, maybe it is dog whistling, maybe it is some sort of communalizing of what should have been a very, very good policy measure, India becoming more refugee friendly, which unfortunately is not the case. I don't know if that answered your question, Ruchir.
The related point is obviously it's election season, and I imagine that part of the process of announcing it now is to get attention on getting BJP's supporters motivated. The question I have for Mitali, ultimately, are there numbers here to justify a conversation on this issue? I mean, are we giving this topic more fuel than it needs? Is it making everyone talk about the one place BJP wants everyone to talk about, which is that their support base is like the support base needs to keep hearing this? I'm curious, do you think the numbers are worth like having a conversation on this?
So actually, that's a great question, Ruchir, and I would have a follow-up question for Manu, because as he pointed out, for 4.5 years, there was no action, and now they're choosing to notify it. So I think the first sort of question for clarification amidst all this noise is, what does a notification mean? What does it even mean? Does it mean that you can now go through with the CAA and begin processes as you would like to, or is this just setting posts before the election? And before I answer the part about data, Ruchir, if you just look back from the time where we started our podcast, we are 8 episodes in, and you just look at the intensity of I would call it noise, but you could also call it narratives that have built up in this period before the election. It's quite clear that everything that seems to be, tethering back to the idea of a Hindu nationalist country, very much the empire status, let's bring back old glory, etc., is what has transpired in the brief period of the last couple of months, whether it is talking about the Ram Mandir project, and I call it a project because I see it as that, whether it is, the attempt by the executive to really tamp down any conversation or dialogue around electoral bonds, whether it is the complete storm that we are seeing within the election commission, or now this, what is the point of notifying CAA? What happens next? If you, interestingly, Ruchir, go onto the website where they put up some very ham-handed FAQs to access more information about it. Some of those pages, just like the election commission pages, just like the SBI's pages, now aren't functioning. So it says that, thank you for checking in, we'll get back to you later. So it's almost like you're saying, it's more than a dog whistle. It's like, okay, everybody look left, now look right, now look down, now look up. So you're constantly in this news cycle where you're not even getting the space to pause and breathe and ask what's going on here. As far as the data that I have seen most recently, there actually hasn't been a very large number of people from the four countries mentioned who have applied for citizenship. I know that there were a couple of interviews that began to circulate around. Here's this lady from Pakistan who can now, who is now very happy and is making announcements saying this is a great idea, but she actually got here after 2014. So, I think people are not even, and this is just illustrative, this is just illustrative to show the fact that I don't think anyone is being allowed the space to go even 1 inch deeper into this conversation and really ask why. And I'll end with one point before I sort of go back to Manu, which is that I think people are also not stupid. You can see by the Home Minister's own admission, he said, "Aap chronology samajhiye," right? Like, look at the pattern. So people understand that when you start talking about CAA, the next step that you want to take is the NRC.
National
And
Register of Citizens.
the National Register of Citizens, that's right. And by their own experience, this government has seen how that really sort of um, uh, came back at them in a not nice light when they attempted it in Assam. So many of the papers that could not be provided by millions of people in just that state were actually Hindus. So I wonder if in this process of creating a big storm around it, you may end up shooting yourself in the foot. But let me go back to Manu on that. Manu,
I, I know,
realistically, like, what next? Like, what happens if you notify?
Mitali, picking up on what you said, right? I think it's so interesting in 2024 that the government of India, the Home Minister, has to come out and say, no, this will not affect citizens of India, right? I mean, that's the level of misunderstanding. That's the level of concern that people have, given what the government can do and what the government, should have perhaps what the government should have done more proactively by explaining to people what this is, right? And I think the problem is largely of their own making. I'll come to the point about law, act, and rule. So the law, when it's legislated, is just the act alone, which provides sort of the skeletal structure, right? But the rules are really the nerves, the meat, the flesh, everything else on it. For example, a law, is actually combines, or rather requires, both the act and the rules for it to be implemented, and really the implementation part is from the rules. So the law can say that, okay, so everybody can get married if you are 18 years, or 21 years, so on and so forth. But the rules will say, okay, so when you get married, what are the documents you need, what do you need to provide, how will your marriage be registered, and what will you get, and who needs to be the witnesses, and so on. So it's really sort of it adds substances, and really the rules is what will actually ensure that the law is put into motion, right? So really now we know, I mean, again, it's they've not explained why they've not actually put this into motion or action over the last 4.5 years. There was clearly no challenge or no stay order in the Supreme Court or anywhere which had made them do it. So it is something, I mean, I think more than what we have been given to understand as to why this has happened. And I think you're exactly right in how you've assessed it. I think there's a huge sort of you know discomfort, or there's a huge sort of concern that, what next with the National Register of Citizens, how will that sort of play out, and so on. And I don't think the government has had has given us all the answers, really. And a lot of it is sort of left to our own imagination, our own worries, and our own fears. So,
But
Richard, I know you started by asking, is this just, does the numbers, justify us giving this so much play? I think more than the numbers, this is such a qualitative issue. It goes to according to me, the fundamental ethos of our country. Like, do we want to be a Hindu nation? Do we want to be a Hindu Rashtra? Do we want to be known as the promised land for Hindus from all over the world? Like, are we modeling ourselves like a little bit around the Israel model? It's very unclear. Some of the language being used definitely tells us that's what they're thinking. That's where the motivation is coming from, to say that yes, Hindus from everywhere, there is a moral obligation. No, we have a moral obligation to the international community. We have a moral obligation to follow international humanitarian laws, and we cannot pick the time and place of a persecution. I mean, today it could be Sudan, tomorrow it could be Bangladesh, day after it could be Syria. But you cannot say that no, only these people from these countries who are persecuted in this manner can come to us, right? That goes against the fundamental principles of asylum or refugee law. So whatever they've done so far is picking and choosing, right? I want to, the idea is to help everyone, but no, I'm saying no, only people who have uh, dark hair and blue eyes and wear white shorts, only they I will help, right? That's how it seems. So it's very pick and choose, and I don't see how it can even stand any sort of scrutiny in terms of what a refugee law should be.
I think that's the core point. It's like, hey, we need to think about refugee reform, but I'm going to zoom in on this component of who I give preference to, and that's why I think the dog whistling allegation against BJP comes up. It's like you could have used this as an opportunity to invite all these people, but I have a little bit of a controversial question. Doesn't it seem like right now, majority of the population does want a Hindu state? I mean, and if that is the requirement, like all of these signaling on symbolism, isn't that the right thing from a ruling party perspective? Like, shouldn't they actually be making the case for making it easier for, I mean, like to use our friend Guru's word, like for Gar Vapsi, for Hindus to come, like Dalits to come back to India, for example. What do you
Yeah.
think about that argument?
So, Ruchir, I just want to sort of flip that also and ask Manu the flip side of that, essentially, because I was thinking about this. One of the arguments that they have not said it expressly but have indicated is that we have picked these countries based on religion, because these have a stated state religion. That's why we picked the countries we did. But Sri Lanka has a stated religion. It's Buddhism. Myanmar may not have it stated, but when you go through the details of how they define the religious context or map, it is again Buddhism. The question I was thinking about, and Manu, would be great to hear on both sides. I was actually thinking, how does this help? Um, does it win you incremental votes? Because you already have a core Hindu voting base that is voting for you. Perhaps they are, perhaps they're happy to see the Ram temple, and that will make them happier. But you have a core Hindu voting base, especially in northern India. By not including Sri Lanka, this is supposedly southern India, a space that the BJP wants to make more inroads in. Are you doing yourselves any favors by doing that? You are not popular in West Bengal. At least you were not in the state elections. Again, this is a very contentious issue for that particular state because of the borders it shares with Bangladesh. Um, are you actually like it's Ghar Vapsi, but is it bringing the more votes into your kitty by doing this stuff?
So, two points from what you said, Mitali. One is they don't want to touch Sri Lanka because it is Buddhist majority. and also I think they don't yet see Buddhist majority nations as, quasi enemy nations, or nations that they need to have a little bit of a tiff with, right? Though they're not, I mean, India is no more popular in Sri Lanka than it is in Bangladesh today. But and we discussed Maldives a couple of episodes ago in detail. But they don't want to touch these countries, and of course Maldives being, the interesting question is, why was Maldives left out back then? Maybe if it was passed now, maybe they would have included Maldives also. Anyway, um, so I think Sri Lanka they don't want to touch, and from that there's an interesting follow-up point, which is that, so they're trying to sort of start something, right? Start issues, or join issues, or create some sort of muddy the waters with countries which are Muslim majority in our neighborhood, right? To say that, oh, all the Hindus from these countries can come, meaning almost insinuating that Hindus are being persecuted there, whether you have evidence for that or otherwise. You want to build this narrative that Hindus are being persecuted there. I mean, the BJP campaign until 2014s were Hindus, Hindu Khatre mein hai, right? Hindus are in danger in India. But now it's also like gone to like Hindus are in danger in other countries, and we are the protectors of Hindu. We are the saviors. We are the guardians. The BJP is the natural choice for the Hindu. So yes, to answer your second question, Mitali, I think it does play into the narrative of consolidating Hindu votes. Initially you said, okay, 60 years of Congress rule, Hindus have suffered, Muslim appeasement. Now we are saying, expanding that argument into the larger subcontinental neighborhood, and say Hindus everywhere, come to us. We are the only ones. We are the ones who built the Ram temple. How they have their Mecca or Medina, how they have their Jerusalem, how they have their maybe Vatican City. We have our Ayodhya. Finally, thanks to us. So I think that's why I started by saying there's this whole Hindu Rashtra under current, right? And that is what they are doing. And of course, I think, like I said, just to re-quote what the Home Minister said this week, he said there is a moral and constitutional obligation. Absolutely, there is no constitutional obligation to help only non-Muslims, right? But there is a moral obligation for the BJP to do this, because this is how they are paying back their mothership, their RSS, their raison d'etre, their ideological, uh, ideological, what do you say, like lighthouse, right? This is what they're doing, to say like, yes, you've given us the ideology, now we are putting that into action. We are creating that sort of promised land for the Hindus. So I think that's how I see it going. Ruchir, I think what you asked is like a typical political versus judicial, or political legal dilemma, right? There is no answer that I can give that will convince you one way or the other. Yes, if more people want something, I think it is the duty of the representatives, the political elected representatives, to actually espouse that cause, right? If most people in India want death penalty for rape, right, then I think morally the political representatives must carry that through in parliament, and enact a law which has a death penalty provision for rape, for example, right? Now, on the other side, there is something called what in judicial legal terms we call constitutional morality. Okay, so this is what has led to this interesting judicial thinking called the basic structure doctrine in India. I'll just take 1 minute to explain. So, in 1973, when the Keshavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala case was decided, the Supreme Court of India said, "Hey, there are certain things that are so fundamentally essential, or and using an American phrase, inalienable to the Indian Constitution, that you cannot take it away. You cannot come in and just say, hey, we'll do away with these things, right? So what are they? They said supremacy of the Constitution is one. They said free and fair elections is one. In subsequent cases, SR Bommai versus Union of India 1994, they said federalism is an essential feature, part of the basic structure. So all those concepts, there's about 8 or 9 concepts they've actually defined, together make the basic structure, and you cannot ever abrogate this basic structure. So The question will be, and this will have to be tested in court, really, right? Because the basic structure doctrine was laid down by a 13-judge bench. The largest bench we have seen in recent years is 7. And there is one 9-judge bench which is being readied to decide the Sabrimala review. Okay. But I'm just giving you an idea. We've not had a 13-judge bench in, decades. But assuming if most people, by your own hypothetical, want a Hindu Rashtra, and they say, yep, let's just do away with this whole secular thing. We are, and this is, I think, the BJP's narrative also, we are surrounded by Muslim majority countries. Hindus are in danger there and here. Tomorrow, these Muslim majority countries may do anything. So let's build ourselves a strong Hindu nation. That's the only way to defend it. And again, this is why I say they take a lot of motivation from the whole Israel experience. And you build that. Now then, the question that will be challenged before Indian constitutional courts, especially the Supreme Court, will be whether this then impinges or impairs the basic structure of the constitution, right? Which we said doesn't matter. You cannot take out federalism from the constitution. You cannot take out free and fair elections. You cannot take out parliamentary democracy. So tomorrow, again, to give you another example, if people say, no, we want a presidential system of election, they cannot, because basic structure actually says parliamentary democracy rather than a presidential system, right? So meaning we are from a Westminster sort of system. So these are all aspects which, like I said, are not settled. There is no straight answer, and will, as we love to say, have to be tested and taken all the way up to the Supreme Court.
I have a unrelated question. So if a 13 people bench decides on something, does that mean to overrule it, you need 13 people again or more?
15.
Or 50? Oh,
50.
so it is.
Yeah, because they wouldn't do 14, because then if you end up with 7 is problem.
How interesting. Okay. I'm actually so glad you became a lawyer and not an astronomer. Because I get to learn from this experience. Anyway, shall we move on to the next topic?
And I can pick that one up. And I think they're quite interrelated. I mean, we've been speaking in past episodes about the electoral bonds. In a slow sort of drip poison method, it's being released, both the data and those who made payments, the size of the payments. And in parallel, because it's important that this data was then shared by the Election Commission itself has been going through a little bit of a storm itself, where it is now down, or it was till only a few hours back, down to just one election commissioner, which seems really, really odd right ahead of the country's national elections. Actually, before I get to my question, Ruchir, I just wanted to say on this whole CAA thing, I know so much of it sounds like gloom and doom. I'll tell you one story which someone shared with me today, and I found it really heartening, which is that apparently young students from across universities in India have all started printing, buying, and wearing T-shirts that basically have the preamble of the Constitution printed on the front. I think it's a really simple message, but I think it's important for us to double down on that. It's so easy to keep debating what the majority wants, what religion looks like, but if you just double down to the core of what a nation is and you hold true to what is the preamble of our Constitution, it's a very good starting point, especially for young people. On the Election Commission and bonds, I think I'll have to pivot to Manu again for some context on what's happening in the Election Commission. But I will open it with a funny story, which is that given all this drama, a few days back, I tweeted, I miss the TN Session era of India, who, as people who are, interested in politics will know, was one of those really strong individuals, very much idiosyncratic, but one of those strong individuals who ran the Election Commission and really set the tone for what the Election Commission should be, which is independent. I can't tell you how much I got trolled after that, which was really interesting. Of course, I was mansplained a lot about how there are other election commissioners, such as James Lingdo, to which I responded saying I was aware of them. And the last time I checked, people were free to make their own list of who they miss, because I don't think that's too much democracy. But it was quite something to see that. So Manu, let's start with that, which is, at least from my memory, I can't recall being this close to a general election. As you said, perhaps as early as Saturday, the 16th of March, we will have dates and phases. But what we don't have yet is clarity on what is even going on inside the Election Commission.
Election Commission is an interesting organization, right? What we need to understand is it is a constitutional body. It is actually, the setup from the constitution, and it is deemed to be autonomous, independent, and has complete superintendence for the conduct of elections in India. And the interesting thing is, it is run by three people up at the top, election commissioners, and then from each state they sort of borrow for the purpose of conducting the election officials from the state, but officials belonging to the IAS cadre, right? Now, interestingly, the whole appointment issue of election commissioners was challenged before the Supreme Court, and only about 3 months ago, the Supreme Court, I think, gave a judgment saying that they hope that it will be three people: the Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition, and the Chief Justice. They should be sort of the they should be the ones appointing, because the earlier system, there was no clarity on how they were appointed. So that was the problem. It was done, of course governments were doing it. Now, the Supreme Court said this should be the mechanism until a new law is in place. Okay, so the two things: one is, people who wanted to sort of read it in a way, they said, well, Supreme Court has said this is how it should be, so make the new law in accordance with it. But when the government came up with the new law, they just said the Prime Minister and a minister nominated by the Prime Minister will do it, right? So essentially they sort of kept it with them, and of course the CJ, the Chief Justice, was not even part of this picture. So anyway, like I said, so they made sure they stacked it with the government representatives, and so that is the law. Now that law has been challenged, and of course there is no judgment on that yet. And as things happen, please keep in mind, electoral bonds comes in 2017, and we only got the judgment in 2024, meaning we waited 7 years for it. So though a lot of people do praise it, and rightly so, but of course we were made to wait, and like I think they say, we are made to wait for good things in life. So with regard to the Election Commission in the appointment, this is the problem. And this was what was happening. Now, interestingly, the government had only had two election commissioners until then, right? And suddenly, after a trip to West Bengal, where they had to assess the ground situation and prepare for the election, which they do across the country, they came back. And interesting, one of them didn't attend the press conference that day. Came back and within a day or two submitted his resignation, thereby reducing the Election Commission to one. I mean, it is problematic even why they had two people, because you usually have an odd number, like I was just explaining a little while ago, that if you have any conflict, then you have a third vote, a casting vote or anything. But so it was very unclear. So then anyway, regardless of what, it obviously there is some conflict, there was some dispute, the two of them didn't get along. So rather than having two people, one clearly said I will leave, or was asked to leave, we do not know. So now they've appointed two more, and of course they've been appointed by the government alone without any consultation with the Chief Justice or the opposition. So that is the problem with the appointment of the Election Commission. But coming to the issue of electoral bonds, and just to put it in context, Mitali, I think it is the 3 E's that we are seeing in play. It's such an interesting week, because we started the week with the electoral bonds judgment and the Supreme Court sort of coming heavily down on State Bank of India when they try to, wiggle out of their sort of order to say, hey, can we get another 3 months? Why? Because we, there's so much data and Excel sheets, and we have to, do a lot of Excel. And this is the premier sort of banking institution in India. It's just really interesting to see them try and put this. And of course, the Supreme Court, to give it credit, really came down hard and said, no, give us the data, give it now, there's no way we are going to entertain this ridiculous sort of, dog ate my homework excuse, right? We started with that. And then, of course, we saw the Election Commission drama, and Election Commission also plays an important role in the electoral bonds drama, because they are the ones who are being asked to put up the data finally from the State Bank of India. But there's a third E to the electoral bonds and the Election Commission, which is the Enforcement Directorate, right? So since they put the data out yesterday, people have been sitting down tabulating. Very interesting. So, okay, so the data that they put out on as of Thursday this last week is that they have one list which has just the political parties, how much each political party has gotten as a gross electoral bond purchase. Okay, and then the second list, again in two silos, second list says the date, the company, and the amount of electoral bond purchase, right? So a company got 5 crores on this date, or what is the total they got on all these dates and so on. But we do not know who has bought which electoral bond for which party. I mean, that's like, again, really silly, but is what State Bank of India has tried to do. But again, the Supreme Court has asked them to put that, what is called the unique electoral bond identification number. I'm sure they had some number and share that also. But even without that data, people have started collating, right? And what have they collated? They've collated the date of the company or the corporate entity, the date of the bond purchase, and any interesting event. Now, what is this interesting event? It's either sometimes there is a income tax raid and soon thereafter there's lots of bonds purchased. Okay. Or there's bonds purchased and soon thereafter that company has got a huge tender or a massive infrastructure project has been awarded, right? In some cases beating international competitors like Larsen and Toubro and so on and so forth. So people have already started, putting two and two together, and it's already given a lot of interesting information, which is why I think it's the three E's: electoral bonds, Election Commission on one hand, and the Enforcement Directorate, right? And as someone said, I think in a bunch of memes, it's now the Extortion Directorate, or first raid, then you get paid, and things like that have already started becoming quite popular. But of course, it's really interesting to see how this is all sort of coming together. And of course, there is a election season, right, coming up. So this is sort of what we were expecting, right? What is
Yeah.
this quid pro quo arrangement? I mean, this is some sort of clearly institutional or legalized quid pro quo. This is just, I mean, that is what is being established, and I'm sure once the bond numbers come out, there'll be more clarity. But we already know. I mean, if there is a income tax raid, and then 2 weeks later, like 200 crores of bonds purchased, and then 3 years hence there's been no further action, we can piece that puzzle together quite easily. So,
Yeah.
like I said, it's been a very interesting and revealing time. I think it has gone to establish and unravel a lot of this sort of this zero corruption or zero tolerance to corruption myth that is being built around governments, especially the union government. And I think this is something that will really sort of play an important role in helping people. And like I said, whether people will be able to easily understand this concept is, again, we don't know until we test it out in a political rally or an election campaign. But interesting to see whether people will buy this concept, that this, I mean, according to me, there is a clear quid pro quo. There's a clear sort of misuse of enforcement agencies, law enforcement agencies. Whether this will translate into people thinking that this is you know legalized corruption, or if people will say that's, if a company which can buy 100 crores, they are sort of able to do it, that's just life. That's what we do when we pay 200 rupees when we get stopped at the traffic lights, to the traffic police, right? They are
Yeah.
bigger, so they pay 100 crores. This is how things run. So what's the big deal? What are you accusing the BJP or any political party of, right? That's, like I said, that's the 40,000 crore question in the coming elections.
But let's ask the entrepreneur what this means. Ruchir, this will amuse you, which is that the Congress has decided to tag this Chanda do dhanda lo, which essentially sort of loosely translated means give us a donation and get a contract in return. And the other interesting thing, Manu, in a lot of this data that's being compiled and matched in terms of companies that are making these donations, is that in many cases for some of these companies, the amount they've donated. So say they've donated, company X has donated 100 crores. It is in many cases 100 to 150 times the company's profits. It it defies logic how a company of that size
No, no,
has
those are just shell entities, meaning
yeah,
they
exactly
set up,
right.
they're just vehicles. So
Exactly
that's,
right. So when you
yeah.
say, oh, but we haven't found any indication of a payment by, Reliance, or we haven't found an indication of a payment by Adani. Again, you have to sort of stop and do the math and say, well, here's a company that makes 20 crores and is making donations of 100 crores. How does that even happen? But Richard, I guess I have a broader question. I mean, earlier we were talking about the election commission, which is, and this has been a problem for people who are watching it, which is that the sanctity of certain institutions has to be maintained in order for a country's democracy to survive and thrive. In the same way, for businesses to work efficiently, there has to be an environment where there is the feeling that there is no subtext, that there is no quid pro quo, that there is no harassment, that there is no enforcement, quote unquote, directorate that is enforcing something quite entirely, outside its ambit. How do you feel about this as someone who's has business interests in the country?
I think the nice part is that the system is working in some way. The fact that we can make these linkages. No, like, at least, no, what I mean by that is like, at least the data is revealing the connections. As in, we
Yeah.
now know, well, first that the electoral bonds were not transparent, so the Supreme Court, even though after 7 years, and that's probably an episode on its own, like how do we get court cases to move faster? And we'll come back to that. But after at least 7 years, we asked the data to be revealed, that the SBI was forced to reveal it even if they did it in two Excels with no connection between themselves. The fact that people are now, the democracy system is starting to churn through the data and figuring out when was an ED case made and what donation did that lead to and so on. So that's what I mean. I mean, at least we have this information, and the point is we should have this information because we want to, like, voters need to know why people are making donations. And obviously, like, because BJP is in power, a lot of the conversations around BJP, but TMC got 1,600 crores, and a lot of the big donors are from West Bengal. So, like, I mean, a lot of parties benefited. Half the contributions, or roughly half the contributions, have gone to other parties. Yeah, so I think I'm just glad that there is a bit more transparency in the exercise, and we now know what money has gone where. I actually believe that we should continue to know. So I hope that we find ways, rather than the thing about the electoral bonds is because they happen through a bank. The one benefit we now have in retrospect is that all the records must have been kept, even though they're being released a little bit slower than we would like. And so a new system, I hope, still captures all of the money movement, because what we don't want from this experience is stuff just converts back to cash and everything moves without a trail, which would be much worse than right now. At least we know who's being paid how much. So that's sort of my general summary. And every opposition party has the right to try and put this on the BJP and have their views ED. But I will say this: I think no one is clean here. The party in power right now is abusing, but so are the other
Well, I mean,
parties.
but it was but it was their idea to start off with. It is the late Finance Minister Arun
Yeah,
Jaitley who's breaking
yeah,
the law
yeah.
in this place. And before we wind up, I just want to because we don't talk about it quite often, but I want to do a hat tip to the people who are making the effort to make those connections. I think we don't talk about that. At least from what I have seen, I have not seen any of the mainstream news channels or the newspapers actually dig deep and do this forensic investigation in terms of, here's the money, here's company X that made the donation, and here's what happened before and after. It is all thanks to a bunch of independent news organizations, in many cases independent journalists, who are doing this work. And I think we really need to laud that, and hat tip to them for doing this very, very important work.
Yeah,
Absolutely, and I think, as you said, Mitali, there's a lot of there's independent news organizations. There's reporters collectives. There's
Yeah.
also people on Twitter who just are so good at putting this together, collating, tabulating, making sense of it, and then putting out these sort of really easy to understand explainers, which, like we've always found, I mean, they're more nimble and more quicker and more efficient and than mainstream media outlets. So that's been fantastic, Richard. But coming back to your point, so you're saying, so if you think political funding could be improved, what would you suggest? Of course, cash is bad, we all agree,
yeah,
right? So you say that we should just keep it open, transparent. Like, let us say, my company wants to donate to your party. I do it. It's a tax write-off, or maybe it's not, but something, right? Because see, ultimately, there's two things that we need to think of. One is, yeah, if I have a lot of money and I want to support a political cause that Ruchir is espousing, then why should I not, why should I be in his party? Which is what is happening also in many parts of the world, including our own, that people start getting into politics, business persons, and then spending it for the party. But why can't I just be outside and say, I like Ruchir's vision, I'll fund him, Uh, but the other thing is also, it can't just be about money, right? So, meaning people with more money
yeah.
should not be the ones having more say. So how do you find the balance?
Yeah, I completely agree, Manu, and I think that is the challenge we have. I mean, politics, especially in today's age, requires a lot of money for anybody to run, and that is not fair. But part of the journey, especially, I mean, this is a lot about incentives and why people run, but having someone run passionately for an issue that affects the community, I imagine should be able to mobilize people and money because that issue resonates with everybody. And so the piece that we really need to see more of is fundraising that does go to smaller amounts from every individual voter. Because I imagine that if there was a big shift towards that, we should not only see reduction in corruption between companies and parties, we should also see reduction in cash movement. I think political parties, we should ask political parties to reveal all of their donations. I imagine that I'm sure there's some guidelines in place for that already. But it will really only change if parties become really good at raising from individuals, and I don't know how far we are from that. I won't, like, if they could build that machinery.
Fair enough. So, on that note, let's go to the final fun segment that we have, which is the Have You Heards. For this is a segment for those of you who are watching us for the first time, where we are trying to each talk about something interesting that we've read or watched or listened to in the last week, and something that is light-hearted and something that we wanted to share in these moments of doom and gloom. So, Richard, do you want to start off with something that you found interesting and exciting and shareable?
Actually, it's a little bit about law also, Manu, so you may be interested. But I'm still in the
Hmm.
technology realm. I mean, I learned programming. I have a degree in programming, so I often go towards tech. One of the at least one of the biggest inventions in terms of headlines of 2010s was Bitcoin, and the person who released the white paper on it had a pseudonym called Satoshi Nakamoto. For the last few years, or maybe like for longer, there is a guy
We don't
called
know who
Craig.
he is, right?
Well, so there is a guy called Craig Wright who's been making the claim that he's Satoshi, and he's had long-winded stories about the whole experience, including suing people for claiming that they are the inventors of Bitcoin. So one of the interesting things that happened in the UK was a prosecutor brought a case to prove that Craig Wright is not the inventor of Bitcoin, to remove any intellectual protection that he has as a potential inventor. And the court came out and categorically stated that Craig Wright is not an inventor of Bitcoin and so cannot make any claims, including allegations against others. So that was really interesting. I'd never seen a case where the system works to prove that someone is not an inventor so that they lose their rights. I thought that was an interesting story. So we still don't
Fantastic.
know. Actually, legally, Craig Wright is definitely not the inventor of Bitcoin, but we
So
still don't
we
know who
only have
Satoshi Nakamoto is.
6 billion more people to rule out. So
That's right. That's exactly right.
Okay,
Correct.
fantastic. Mitali?
Yeah.
I can go next, and I was just going to say, I don't know if you read the conspiracy theory that circled at the early part of the Satoshi Nakamoto story, Ruchir, which is basically that it's a product of Japan and it's all of Japan's largest companies. So if you break it up, it's Samsung, Toshiba, Nissan, and Motorola, which is what gave birth to the name Satoshi Nakamoto. That one was doing the rounds for a long time. I think mine is it's a little gloomy again, and I'm sorry for that, but I'll start with the good part, which is that this isn't something I knew anything about. And what I'm going to talk about is MMA, mixed martial arts. I have sort of zero knowledge of it. I don't know a bantamweight from a heavyweight, but now I'm learning thanks to my 13-year-old son, who is a huge MMA fan. And the other day, I just came across a news story about, I just saw sort of MMA India, and I thought, oh my God, there's someone from India. I should tell my son about it. It was a video clip, and it's not clear when this was recorded, so there's no date to it, of an MMA fighter from Manipur whose name is Chung Kreng Koren, pronouncing it correctly, who had just won a particular fight. And as he was holding up his belt, he was breaking down in tears and saying, it's my humble request to the prime minister. There is intense violence happening in my state. People are hungry in relief camps. They're not getting enough food. The children aren't going to school. I really, really implore you to do something. And then my son and I started sort of looking up his story. I think he's one of 4 or 5 siblings. His mother was a widow and brought them up single-handedly. She would go around sort of borrowing 10, 20 rupees every time he had to go and fight, just so she could, have enough money to give him. He's obviously lived in very difficult circumstances. And I think the bit that really touched my heart was that when he said that, I don't like to tell people I'm poor, because when you say that, first they pity you and then they lose respect for you. So I never say it. I just take, whatever circumstances I face, and I know that I'm going to try and make MMA a career. But I was really sad to see that someone who's standing at a stage where he's won something incredible and he should be soaking it in, was full of so much pain for his state. And I think it's also quite admirable how a lot of sports people outside of what is our beating heart, which is cricket, have actually had the courage to stand up and often say things that our big stars and legends have not. They have sort of called attention to issues that deserve attention. And if you haven't looked it up, I would encourage you to read more, both about the fighter and, of course, about what's happening in Manipur. So that's my Have You Heard? Manu.
Absolutely. Fantastic share Mithali, and yeah, I've also come across him, but didn't know the backstory, and I'll definitely look it up a little bit more. My have you heard is actually a have you seen, and if you haven't, you should see it sometime soon. It continues on my little like Malayalam movie spree, because this is actually the only two movies I've watched in the last year have been Malayalam. So this one is called Manjumel Boys. Many of you would have watched this old movie called 127 Hours, which is about a sort of a climber who gets stuck, or his hand gets wedged between two rocks, and it's quite painful. I won't go into the gory details of how he comes out after 127 hours, but to say it's very painful. But this Malayalam movie is sort of similar, but it has 10 friends going on a trip, and one of them, gets in a little bit of a strife, and what happens then. But it's fantastic, for a Indian regional language movie to come up with like a survival thriller genre of movie making, but where friendship is clearly like the undercurrent, and where they have sort of so much drama, and it's done so really well. So, and it was released this year, in about a month and a half ago, and it's now the highest ever grossing Malayalam movie ever. So again, if you ever get a chance, it's called Manjumel Boys, and it's still playing in movie theaters, but it should come on a platform pretty soon. So I think with that, we've come to the end of the 8th episode. So once again, thank you all for listening and watching and supporting, and we appreciate you, spending time to listen, and we appreciate even more all the feedback that you can give. Please share your feedback at indiadialoguepodcast@gmail.com, or find any one of us on X, formerly Twitter. The podcast itself is TID underscore podcast on Twitter, or you can look up India Dialogue Podcast on YouTube. We are Mithali is at Mithali Live. Ruchir is at Ruchir underscore P, and I am at Manuraj1983. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you all again in a week with more issues that require to be dialogued in India.